All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual information session for the New York Community Trust's 2023 Request for Proposals to Build the Capacity of Smaller Budget Arts and Cultural Groups. My name is Salem Zagay, and I am the Trust Program Officer for Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation. I am joined today by my colleague, Mark Schell, Program Assistant for Thriving Communities, whose voice you'll hear a little later on today. We've organized today's session into two parts. We'll begin with a brief presentation about the 2023 Arts Capacity Building RFP and use the latter portion of the session to answer your questions. Please note that this session is in webinar format, which means participants' video and audio are disabled. Mark and I will also stay off camera. The session is being recorded and will be made available online. We'll be sure to distribute that to this list after the meeting. When we begin the Q&A portion, we do kindly ask that you use the Q&A function to ask your questions. Mark will read them aloud and I will respond verbally. We'll prepare an FAQ document and distribute that alongside the recording of the session. And if for some reason we do not get to your question today, you are always welcome to follow up via email. So I wanted to begin today with a brief overview of the Trust's arts and culture grant-making goals more broadly to get us situated. So those goals are to first promote diversity in the arts by expanding access to opportunities for artists and audiences from diverse backgrounds. Second, strengthen the management of arts groups serving communities in the 5 boroughs. Third, develop talented young artists from historically marginalized populations. Fourth, improve arts education in public schools in the city. And lastly, strengthen arts advocacy. We issue requests for proposals for specific arts programs that primarily align with goals number 2 and number 3. So the Arts Capacity Building Program has an RFP each year, and the Van Leer Fellowship Program has an annual RFP. We also, on occasion, issue RFPs for our arts education grants, which are managed by my colleague Lee Ross. So if you have any questions regarding our arts education grant making, please contact Lee. Proposals that align with our goals to promote diversity in the arts and strengthen arts advocacy are accepted through the Trust's ongoing competitive grants RFP. Please note that these grants usually support larger scale initiatives that have potential to advance systems change or sector improvements, including enhanced service delivery, with benefit to more than just a single organization and its constituents. The focus of today's session is goal number 2. To strengthen the management of arts groups, and our Arts Capacity Building Program solicits proposals annually to this end. If you would like to read more about our arts and culture grant-making strategy, we encourage you to visit our website at nycommunitytrust.org. First, you'll want to click on the tab labeled Information For to open a drop-down menu, and then from there you'll click What the Trust Funds to view our priorities across our various program areas, including arts and culture. If you'd like to see past grants that the Trust has awarded, we encourage you to review press releases, which are available under the Newsroom tab. Equally important is knowing what we don't fund, so I do want to share a little bit more about that as well. We do not make grants for general operations only. As you'll note later in this presentation, a portion of our grants can be used for this, but requests cannot be for general operating support in full. We don't make grants for development or fundraising, capital projects or brick and mortar costs, endowments, equipment, or deficit financing, the creation or presentation of artwork, including residencies, unless of course you're applying through the Van Leer RFP, exhibitions, performances, festivals, and screenings. And lastly, we do not make grants for more than one project at a time through our arts portfolio. In other words, an organization can only have one arts grant at a time. All right, now that you have a little background information, let's dive deeper into our Arts Capacity Building Program, the focus of today's session. Each year, the Trust awards 5 to 10 2- or 3-year grants to help build the capacity of arts and cultural groups with operating budgets roughly between $250,000 and $1.5 million. Grants help groups carry out a specific project designed to resolve administrative challenges, increase efficiency, start a new or expand an existing program, or explore other adaptive ways to sustain the organization in the longer term. Projects should help groups navigate a critical juncture, a rare but significant opportunity or challenge, such as a leadership change, a space transition, or organizational restructuring. I'd like to offer a few examples of projects that we have supported through this program. Grants to Kundiman and Teatro Circulo to strengthen communications and marketing as they sought to expand their audiences. This included hiring consultants and personnel to develop and carry out related strategies. Grants to African Film Festival and Arte East to build on the success of virtual programming carried out during the height of the pandemic and develop and further market their film archives to broader audiences. A grant to Indie Space was made to finalize its merger with Indie Theater Fund and expand the single entity's reach following a public relaunch. This included staff lines to support the transition and manage programmatic growth. Grants to Nuyorican Poets Cafe and National Black Theater were made to develop off-site programs as both groups prepared to close their facilities for long-term renovations. Before I continue, I want to note that the 2023 RFP should be your primary source of information regarding this opportunity. Much of the information in this presentation reiterates what's in the RFP, but this should not be used as a replacement for what's in the written guidelines. So please be sure to refer to the RFP as you are preparing your proposal. Now I'd like to go over the basic requirements for the Arts Capacity Building Program. Applicants must be a 501c3 organization, or if unincorporated, a group that is applying with a fiscal sponsor with 501c3 status. You must primarily operate within the 5 boroughs and be located in New York City. You must have at minimum a 5-member board of directors with at least 4 board members who are independent. To be eligible for this grant opportunity, your operating budget must be roughly within the specified range. Please note that we do not use projected operating budgets to determine eligibility, as these are aspirational and still in progress. We request and look at your actual expenses for the most recently completed fiscal year to determine whether or not your organization fits roughly within the $250,000 to $1.5 million range. We don't offer this to be rigid, but rather as a general guidepost for the types of organizations we hope to support through this RFP. If you've experienced some fluctuation over the past 2 years that might put you slightly over or under this range, please still apply and submit your organization's finances for both FY21 and FY22, and include any explanations in the proposal narrative. That would be very helpful. You should not have an active grant with the trust that concludes after June 2023. It's okay to apply if your active grant concludes in June. It just can't go past June. Please note that this rule excludes grants awarded through collaborative funds, such as the Mosaic Networking Fund. Lastly, please only submit one project proposal through this RFP. In addition to these basic eligibility requirements, we take the following into consideration when reviewing proposals. In an effort to promote equity in the cultural sector, priority is given to groups that are created and led by people of color, operate programs in neighborhoods and boroughs that have historically had access to fewer resources, and to groups that have never received a grant through this program before. As you know, there are thousands of arts and cultural groups in the city, and we fund across artistic disciplines. We try our very best to support organizations that we may not have before. This doesn't mean that you should not apply if you don't meet these priority items. We just wish to be transparent about what guides our decision-making as we determine how best to allocate our limited resources. That said, this program is competitive, and a huge factor that we take into consideration is timing. What is the critical juncture your organization is facing at this particular time? Help us understand the significance of this moment or turning point so we have context for your request. Help us understand your organization's readiness for change at this particular moment in time. How will the project you're proposing help you navigate the critical juncture you've identified and build the capacity of your organization? Lastly, please know that we take a close look at your organization's finances. Stable financial health is important in the review of any proposal submitted to the trust. Unfortunately, we do not provide deficit financing, so we are not able to consider requests from organizations with negative net assets or recurring deficits. Moving on to the application. The application for the Arts Capacity Building Program consists of 3 major parts: a proposal narrative not to exceed 5 pages, a 2 or 3 year project budget. The duration is up to you, but the request should be for 2 or 3 years. And a package of support materials, which I'll go over in more detail shortly. For the proposal narrative, please tell us about your organization, its mission, history, and programs. What communities or populations do you serve? What critical juncture is your organization facing, and how will your proposed project help you navigate it? What goals do you hope to accomplish over the 2 or 3 year period? What activities will take place over this period to help you accomplish them? How will you know you've been successful in facilitating the change? And how do you plan to sustain that change over the grant period, after the grant period has concluded? The latter is particularly important as our capacity building grants are typically non-renewable. Also, if you plan to hire a consultant, please be sure to include a bid that outlines their scope of work and confirms estimated costs. And of course, if there's anything the last few years have taught us, it's that planning can only get you so far. As the pandemic and its related effects continue, are there any obstacles you're potentially anticipating that could hinder progress? Let us know. Moving on to the project budget. Please be sure to provide a 2 or 3 year itemized project budget that indicates annual and total costs. This means we would appreciate a column totaling itemized costs per year, as well as total costs for the 2 or 3 year period. That is the sum of those annual expenses. Applicants are welcome to request up to $75,000 per year, inclusive of the up to 25% you may budget for general operations. If you're anticipating higher costs in one year than the other, it's fine to request more for that year, but your total for the grant period should not exceed $150,000 for 2 years or $225,000 for 3. If expenses exceed what a trust grant might cover, please be sure to indicate other sources of income to cover the balance, noting what's confirmed, pending, or projected. Lastly, a question that we get a lot. Can grant monies be used to hire staff or expand existing staff responsibilities? For instance, moving someone from part-time to full-time? Absolutely. To the extent that it is appropriate to hire a staff person to accomplish the goals of the capacity building project you have identified, yes, it's important to indicate how this staff person will help you accomplish the goals you have outlined for the project and how you plan to maintain the staff position beyond the grant period. So you have your proposal narrative and the project budget prepared. There are 4 to 5 additional items that we request as support materials. First is the New York Community Trust proposal cover sheet, which I'll walk you through in just a second. Second, if applicable, is a bid from a project consultant confirming the scope of work and fee for services. Third is an operating budget for the current fiscal year. Fourth is an actual income and expenses for the most recently completed fiscal year. Keep in mind that this is what's going to help us determine your organization's eligibility for this program. And again, if you've experienced some fluctuation over the last 2 years, you're more than welcome to still apply, and please submit actual expenses for both FY21 and FY22. Lastly, a board of directors list that includes professional affiliations. Items 2 through 5 should be combined into a single PDF file with your proposal narrative and project budget. This PDF file is then uploaded to the proposal cover sheet, which must also be completed. I'll walk you through that now. Give me one moment to switch screens. All right, so you'll want to go to proposals.nycommunitytrust.org. This will take you to our grants portal. Once you've reached this page, please click Apply here. Under Available RFPs, you'll see that the 2023 Arts Capacity Building RFP is listed first. Click Apply next to this RFP. This will take you to the proposal cover sheet for the 2023 Arts Capacity Building RFP. We do ask that you complete this form in its entirety, noting the mandatory fields that are marked by red asterisks. It asks for information about the person completing the form, general information about the applicant organization, demographic information about your organization staff and board, information about your project, population served, and then lastly, you'll be able to upload the single PDF file that should include your proposal narrative, your project budget, and the support materials here. Once this is all complete, you click the certification box here, and then click Submit this request now to submit your application. One note for organizations that are unincorporated and using a fiscal sponsor, and this is really important. On the proposal cover sheet, you will want to click under Applicant Organization, this option here, where it says, we are using a funds administrator for the proposed project. Once you click this, it disables the mandatory field for the EIN, and then actually creates a new section to complete information for the funds administrator, the same thing as a fiscal sponsor. This is where you'll put that information. Please be sure to click that option at the top under Applicant Organization if you are using a fiscal sponsor. All right, give me one moment to go back to my slides. So the instructions that I just provided are included on the slide labeled Application Submission. We'll distribute these slides alongside the recording of this info session and an FAQ document after the session is ended. One final note before we head into Q&A. Important dates. Proposals are due by 5 p.m. on Thursday, March 9th, 2023. Decisions will be announced in June 2023. With that, I thank you for your attention and would now like to go into Q&A. If you haven't already, please begin typing your questions into the Q&A section. As a reminder, we will transfer what we discussed during Q&A into an FAQ document that we'll distribute alongside a recording of this session. I will hand it over to Mark now to begin reading our questions.
Hello, everyone. This is Mark Schell with New York Community Trust. I'm a program assistant here. I'll start with the first question. What does independent mean for board members?
Sure. So what do we mean by independent board members? We here mean folks that are not paid staff. So usually we prefer not to see more than 1 to 2 paid staff serving on your board. But when thinking about the number of independent board members, you must have at least 4 that are completely independent and not paid staff.
Next question. My organization is 55 years old and I'm fairly new on staff. How may I learn whether our organization has ever received a capacity giving grant from the New York Community Trust?
Yes, so you should feel free to reach out to us and we can go ahead and look in our records. We'll share an email address actually at the end of today's session that you can, well, the email address is Mark's and you can go ahead and send Mark that request and we'll go ahead and look into it for you.
What is the difference between professional and support staff? We have full-time and part-time staff who are all professionals, whether teaching artists or actors.
That's a great question. Hang on one second. So here the distinction is not so much between part-time and full-time. What we want to know is, for example, for permanent staff, they can be full-time or part-time. This includes sort of executive roles, key program and operations staff, executive directors, executive leadership. For support staff, we are mostly thinking about clerical positions such as administrative assistants. So think of the distinction that way.
We had negative net assets in fiscal year 2021 due to PPP loans that had not yet been forgiven. Will this prevent us from applying?
So I think this is a good sort of example of when you should probably submit financials for both FY21 and FY22 so we can get a better understanding of your current status. So I would say that you should still apply if assuming sort of those loans have been forgiven as of today, then that we will assume that the negative net assets are no longer an issue. So you should still apply, but be sure to include your finances for more recent years as well.
One individual is asking that you repeat your comment on current Mosaic grantees.
Mosaic. Oh, yes. So I was just mentioning that we have a rule here where we can only make one arts grant at a time to arts organizations, but this excludes grantees that have received awards through our collaborative funds, which includes the Mosaic Network and Fund. So even if you are a grantee of the Mosaic Network and Fund, that is completely separate. You are still eligible to apply to the capacity building program.
We have an individual who's requesting that you go over the narrative for the project budget page.
Sure, let me pull that up. Oop. All right, so for the project budget, sorry, I was just pulling up that slide. So for the project budget, you should provide a 2, I'm going to make that correction, a 2 or 3 year project budget that indicates annual and total cost, and you want to itemize to the extent possible. So this is where you'll want to distinguish personnel related expenses with, other than personnel related expenses. If you have any materials budgets or other sort of technology related expenses, whatever it might be, it's helpful to actually indicate all of that in an itemized fashion. We will want to see columns totaling your annual costs as well as the total cost for the 2 or 3 year period. And that's true if you apply for a 2 year grant or a 3 year grant. We'll want to see what are the total costs for each of those years, and then what are your total costs for the 2 or 3 year period. In terms of the request amount, so we do have an up to $75,000 cap annually. One note that I made was that if you are anticipating more expenses in one year over another, it's okay to budget accordingly. We just ask that the total request amount to the trust not exceed the equivalent of $75,000 annually when you total it together. So that would be about $150,000 over 2 years or $225,000 over 3 years. If your project budget or your sort of projected expenses actually exceed what a trust grant can cover, this is where it's really important to indicate other sources of income. And we do ask that you let us know what is confirmed, pending, or projected. And then lastly, a note on the portion that can be used for general operations. You can use up to 25% of a grant each year for general operations, what we consider administration. It's fine to budget accordingly for that. But understand that that's part of the $75,000 annual cap. And then I think my last comment was about staff costs being allowable. We understand that the work of your organization would not be possible without staff. And so most of our grants do actually support staff lines when you look at the budgets. We do ask so that you be really clear about what that additional staff is going to allow you to accomplish as part of the goals of this capacity building project. Because for us, I think that is the most important thing, is what's the project? What are the activities that are going to take place over a 2 or 3 year period? And how will you know you've been successful?
For staff capacity, can this include development staff who can help increase funds? And next question, is rent an eligible expense?
So for staff capacity, we actually do not make grants to support development or fundraising. So that's the one area that we will not be able to help with. I understand the importance of it, but it's just not something that we're able to fund through this program. And in terms of rent being an eligible expense, yes. So this is where we, are considering that up to 25% of a grant going towards at what we consider general operations or administration. You should include it on your budget.
Do a percentage of allocated New York Community Trust funds need to go towards general operating, or can 100% go to staffing consulting costs?
100% can go to staffing and consultant costs. So we do not have any specifications with regards to how you use those monies, aside from not exceeding the 25% if you wanted to use it for general operations. If you wanted to spend the full 150K or 225K on project-related expenses, that is totally acceptable.
Is the Van Leer RFP available on an invite-only basis? How do we find out more?
The Van Leer RFP actually is an annual RFP. I should note, and it's an open RFP, so anyone is allowed to apply when it's released. The timeline for that is usually, I think, March RFP announcement with around a May proposal deadline and an October decision. And I want to note that we actually alternate each year between two categories. So our Van Leer Fund focuses on providing opportunities to young, talented artists from historically marginalized populations. And we actually define young very concretely. We have our pre-professional category, which is for folks ages 18 and under. So 1 year we issue a request for proposals for pre-professional artists. And then we have our Young Professionals program, which supports fellowships and residencies for artists ages 18 to 30. So we do have that hard cap at age 30. This year, let's see, 2023, we will be issuing our Van Leer RFP to support fellowships for young professionals. So this year, you are welcome to apply if you have fellowships or residency programs that support artists between the ages of 18 and 30.
Will the trust fully fund grant requests, or might the trust fund proposals at a lesser amount than the request? Thank you.
So we are happy, let's say this, if you have a project budget and all of the expenses can be covered by a trust grant, that is perfectly acceptable. We are happy to cover that in full. However, if your project budget or the related expenses actually exceed what a trust grant can cover, that's where it's going to be really important to indicate other sources of income and note what's confirmed versus pending versus projected. And with regards to funding proposals at a lesser amount than the request. So this isn't something that we would do without discussion with an applicant organization. It's possible that we might not be able to support a grant request in full. I would say that we tend to actually support the grant requests in full, but in some instances where we're not able to, we would be in conversation with the applicant before actually moving a grant recommendation forward. So you would hear from us if that was the case.
Can you give examples of when bids from project consultants would be necessary or applicable when they wouldn't?
Sure. So sometimes organizations might want to, okay, let's say there's an organization that is preparing to undergo some sort of space transition, and they wanted to work with a consultant to do a feasibility study around a new space. That's the type of bid we would want to see sort of a scope of work and related expenses for the consultant that would do that feasibility study. We also typically see this for groups that are considering strategic planning as part of their capacity building request. This is usually something that accompanies a leadership transition. If you have someone new that's actually coming to the organization and taking the helm, they might want to engage a strategic planning consultant that can work with staff and board to revisit the sort of mission, vision, and goals of an organization. And we have a few other instances. I think folks have worked with marketing consultants when they've had sort of discrete campaigns that they've wanted to run. We have seen bids from, I'm trying to think of other consultants. That is all that I'm thinking of right now, but I hope that that's helpful.
Will an application be more favorably received if the population served is NYC focused / specific?
So we are a geographically specific funder, right? We're the New York Community Trust, and our grants support the residents of New York City. So we do actually prefer, we kind of require it actually, that population served be based in New York City. In the instances where an organization might have a broader sort of national reach, we would want to know whether or not the majority of your constituents are New York City based, because that's actually important for us too. And I'm seeing who's asking this question, so I'm assuming this isn't within the context of an art service organization that might actually be operating nationally. You should actually have a significant percentage of your constituents be based in New York City.
What is the cap on request amount based on organizational budgets?
What is the cap on request amount? So we don't actually have one. I think sort of a general, I don't know, rule of thumb, I would say, is that we are unlikely to make a grant that exceeds, let's say, 25%, probably, maybe 30% of your operating budget. So while you can apply for up to 75K, we do ask that you not do that if your organization has a smaller operating budget. So keep that in mind. It's not sort of a hard and fast rule, but I will say in my experience managing our grants for the arts and culture program, we usually don't exceed 25 to 30% of your annual operating expenses.
Do you fund strategic planning?
Yes, so we do support strategic planning, but I will say that proposals are more competitive when strategic planning is accompanied by some form of implementation. Now, I know this is challenging because the whole point of strategic planning is to actually identify your priorities and then carry those out in subsequent years. But most of the time, organizations have a general sense of what they want to focus on before going into a strategic planning process. So all we would ask is that you help us understand what some of those broader goals might be. And hopefully, in the second year of a 2-year request or second or third year of a 3-year request, you let us know, what that implementation might look like.
There is a mention of space transition in the RFP as eligible, but also that bricks and mortar costs cannot be covered. Could you please clarify?
Yes. So the space transition was in regards to what we typically see as a critical juncture that an organization might identify. So there are leadership transitions. That's fairly common in terms of the critical junctures that applicants to this program might identify. And then there are space transitions that they might identify as the critical juncture. While that is the critical juncture, and we do not support brick and mortar costs, we do actually support other types of activities that are related to that transition. For example, you might be undergoing a renovation and your facility might be closed for some time. You'll need to probably program offsite and perhaps establish partnerships with other organizations that can offer their venues. This is a good example of, where you might actually dedicate some staff time or engage a consultant to help you identify those potential venues or partnerships and actually begin to develop the offsite programming.
Our dance organization has its first program and artistic director, and he would like to give dancers a raise to ensure stability and consistency of the dance company. Is giving a raise going to be compelling enough, or should we focus on continuing to fund our new program and artistic director?
So I think, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that most organizations are probably revisiting this conversation around equitable wages, and it's something that we are incredibly supportive of. However, while we fund staff positions, remember that the project is not to hire staff or increase staff sort of wages, right? We're sort of assuming that that's going to be in the project budget. I think the more important thing is you letting us know what those increases are going to allow you to accomplish as an organization. The capacity building project, right? What is that 2 or 3 year project that you want to undertake to better position your organization to deliver on its mission? That should be sort of guiding, I would say the guiding light, right, when you're thinking about an appropriate and compelling project for this.
When you mention current operating budgets, is that for fiscal year 2022?
It's for whatever is current for you. So that might be calendar year 2023 for some folks. I'm going to assume that it's FY23. In other words, it should not be completed. It should be the operating budget that's currently in progress.
What counts as development slash fundraising funds? For example, if we are looking to do a project to do a major upgrade to our donor contact database system, but not actually doing any new fundraising or cultivation, would that count?
Yes, that does count because the enhancements to your donor contact database system to us is actually a technology enhancement for your organization. And we assume that it has all kinds of benefits and not just not just to development and fundraising. So that definitely counts. We just don't support any, fundraising expenses. For instance, campaigns, gala expenses, just ongoing development positions. Those are things that we don't typically fund through this program.
If we choose to include fiscal year 2021 numbers, do you want our budget or a profit and loss?
A profit and loss piece. So we would actually want actuals, actual income and expenses.
If our organization does their own programming and also acts as a fiscal sponsor when looking at our budget, would the money we receive as a fiscal sponsor be considered if we go over 1.5 million?
Okay, let me process that question. So I'm assuming this is money received that is regranted back out. I'm not sure if that is the right assumption, but I would say that you can exclude regranting monies. I think where we don't make the exception, excuse me, is if you have facilities related expenses that might put you over that $1.5 million mark, because I think that still counts as sort of as part of your operating expenses.
Is this a good summary of criteria for proposal review? Clarity of critical juncture, readiness for change, ability to carry out the capacity building project. Are there other criteria we could or should keep in mind?
So again, I think this is where I am going to say to please refer to the RFP, the written guidelines, because I think we do indicate on this at the top of the second page, the criteria that we use when reviewing proposals. So it does include these items. I would say the thing that's not listed in what was just mentioned is around stable finances. So again, this is where we would look very closely at your organization's finances to ensure there are no negative net assets or recurring deficits.
What financial documentation would you need for fiscal year 2022? We won't have a 990 by the deadline, and our 2021 was below 250K, but 2022 was above.
So we purposely do not ask for a 990, an audit, a CPA review. We don't ask for those things because we know that you're probably still working on them. So we just want to see an accounting of your income and expenses for the most recently completed fiscal year. So it does not have to be audited.
On the financial statements that you're requesting, are you looking for the most recently completed year actuals, even if that has not yet been audited?
Yeah, so I think I just answered that question. Hopefully that answers it, but we don't need to have your audited actuals for the most recently completed fiscal year, again, because we understand that your organization is probably still working to finalize those items.
Is board training slash capacity building applicable for funding?
Yes, board training is appropriate for this. I will say, though, that rarely have I seen board training as the only request for a project, an appropriate sort of capacity building project. It's usually part of something else. So I guess that's my way of saying that it might not be as competitive, right, as other more comprehensive projects.
Believe this was covered, but maybe to reiterate, can the funding cover existing staff time needed to carry out the proposed capacity building project?
Yes.
Is permanent full-time staff folded into the 25% general operating cap, or is it separate?
So I think this is where we would ask, so if it's part of sort of, if there are positions that are part of helping you manage the organization generally. So I'm thinking here about an executive director or development staff, whatever it might be, that's usually rolled into what we call administration or general operations. These are sort of key roles that you need to help sustain the organization that's not related to specific programs. So if again, the permanent full-time piece is not, that can exist in the sort of project budget component, or it can be under administration. It just depends. I think what's more important for us to know is what staff roles you need to budget for in order to accomplish the goals that you have outlined for the capacity building project. If they are not directly related to the capacity building project goals that you have identified, then I would roll those under administration.
I know equipment is not an improved project, but what about the hiring of consultants and paying for a theater space to be redesigned for better service to the community and artists working in that space?
So you can hire a consultant to, let's say, create a new design for your space, but you can't actually use the grant monies to undergo construction related to that redesign. I don't know if that answers the question, and if not, please feel free to pop another one in.
May we apply to both the capacity grant and Van Leer this year, as we are eligible for both slash either?
Yes, you are welcome to apply to both. Keep in mind that the proposal deadline for the arts capacity building RFP is March 9th with a June decision. And then we release the Van Leer RFP in March with a May proposal deadline for an October decision. So you're welcome to apply to both. And most likely, we will have a sense of whether or not we'd be funding the capacity building grant before moving on to Van Leer.
Can you include more than one bid for two consultants working on the project in differing capacities?
Yes, absolutely. You're welcome to budget for as many consultants as you need for that project.
Would hiring a search firm to support a leadership transition be an eligible expense? And related, if we propose to work with more than one consultant, should we submit a bid for each?
Yes, you are welcome to budget for a search firm to support the leadership transition. I will say, with regards to leadership transitions, it is really important for us to have a good understanding of your timeline for that transition. So if you're working with a search firm, we absolutely would want to see that a new leader is actually hired during the grant period. And then the second part of your question, I think we answered. You are welcome to work with more than one consultant if needed, and you should submit a bid for each. Again, this is helpful to us because it actually confirms the estimated expenses related to those consultants and confirms the scope of work.
Does a fiscal sponsor need to be located in New York City?
No.
Are there any grants or support you offer for organizations whose budget is over 1.5 million?
So at this time, let me just go back. Actually, I think this is helpful to go back on the slides. Give me one moment. Okay, there we go. So I just want to go over the sort of grant, our general grant making goals. And I want to emphasize that this RFP info session is specifically for our arts capacity building program to strengthen the management of smaller budget arts groups. So this is not for organizations whose budgets exceed the $1.5 million max. any other priority that we have listed here under our grant making goals, you can have a budget that exceeds $1.5 million. There is no limitation there. The only rule that we have with regards to budget thresholds is that all applicants should have a minimum operating budget of $250,000. So if you are thinking about a larger scale initiative, perhaps a collaborative project to improve some sort of service delivery for the sector, that works. I think the question here is really, what project are you thinking about that you would want to apply for, and making sure that it aligns with our grant making goals. If the question is more about whether or not we provide capacity building support to organizations with budgets over $1.5 million, the answer for that, unfortunately, right now is no, although we do hope to revisit that in the future. And if so, Stanley, we will definitely reach out to you.
Our organization is based in New York City and has 3 unique branches. The majority of all teaching artists and program managers are based in New York City, but only one of the 3 programs has most of its participants located in New York City. Is it possible for us to apply for a targeted grant for just that one program?
So I think, again, so I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes, but I do think that it's important for you to indicate what the capacity building project is. If you are requesting support for an ongoing program, that is not a good fit for this RFP. So I do want to suggest that you look into some of the other opportunities and not this one, because this is specifically for capacity building. So if you are trying to make some sort of significant change or enhancement to an existing program, then this is appropriate. But if it's just going to be on support for an ongoing program, unfortunately, this is not a good fit.
Is building a new website an allowed project?
Yes.
What would be more competitive? A request for support to hire an executive search firm and cost of the leadership transition, such as 2 salaries overlapping, or the leadership transition after a new leader has been identified?
So it's really difficult to comment on the merits of a proposed project. But what I can say is that we have supported on both ends in the past, right? So I can't really tell you what's competitive because it's totally dependent on the pool of applications at any given time. But I will say again that we have supported both. So that includes hiring a search firm and helping providing assistance with the leadership transition, where maybe an outgoing executive director might stay on as a consultant for some time until that transition is complete and a new leader fully takes the helm. And then we've also supported transitions after someone has been hired and they want to rethink an organization's mission and visions as part of their new leadership vision. So both of those apply, and we have absolutely made grants for both. I think it's up to you. Sorry, Mark, I just want to say that. I think it's up to you to determine what is the highest priority for your organization.
How many requests do you usually get for this grant?
That is a great question, and it's hard because I think it has ranged over the years. I think at the most we've probably had 60 applications in response to this RFP, and sometimes we've had as few as 25. So it really depends. I just want to note that this is the first year that we are returning to the annual capacity building RFP, as we had suspended it over the last 2 years in response to the pandemic. We were actually accepting proposals on a rolling basis, and now we are returning to the annual RFP. So I am anticipating that this year we will have applications that are on the higher end.
We have just migrated to a co-executive director model. A new ED just started last week. Would we be eligible to apply for leadership transition project if it had to do with succession planning and technology training for the co-EDs?
Yes.
Have you supported / would you support in a single grant both parts of the leadership transition you described, perhaps over a 3-year period?
Yes, I think this was maybe like 2 or 3 questions ago. Yes, so we absolutely can. Again, I think it's up to the applicant organization to really help us better understand why it's important to do all of those things in the identified grant period, right? We are hoping to be responsive to your organization's needs, and whatever that looks like, I think is up to you to articulate in the proposal. So I don't see why we wouldn't support both of those things, but I have typically seen them be separate requests in the past, and I think it's just because of timeline usually.
Okay, and that's our last question for the moment. Do we have any other questions? Please feel free to put them in the question and answer section. Do you offer to look at grants before they're due?
No, so unfortunately, due to the high volume of requests we receive, we are unable to review draft proposals in advance. We are also unable to meet individually with organizations in advance of proposal submission. So I'm sorry that we're not able to do that, but the requests simply exceed our staff capacity.
Okay, does anyone have any last questions? If our programs support artists and we want to increase funding to those artists through the program, could you clarify to Rebecca Yagi? Oh, Rebecca Yagi says never mind. So.
Oh, okay. I just want to let me just go to the end slides here so that you have contact information for Mark. All right, so looks like we don't have any further questions. I hope that this was helpful to you all. Again, I'm really sorry that we're not able to meet with folks individually in advance of proposal submission, but hopefully this was helpful. We just want to close with a reminder to please direct any questions that may arise for you after we close this session to Mark Schell at msc@nyct-cfi.org, and we will work together to respond to your questions. We will also follow up with links to the recording, an FAQ document, and these slides, either by the end of this week or early next. So thanks for bearing with us as we work on that. And again, thank you all for your interest in this program and for tuning into our information session. I hope it's been helpful to you, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Goodbye.